clarity to have a vote on a separate MOU for this fourth layer, and then the other 3 layers.
So I know 2 big items are around liability. Which entity, which agency, whether it be school board or sheriff's office, would quote unquote own the behaviors of the STOMP participants, in particular, any accidental behavior on the part of those employees, right? Who owns that? And then whether or not there are additional costs involved for us to retain any higher levels of insurance. I mean, those are 2 pieces that have been discussed.
And what the actual costs are. Like I asked earlier for an actual quote, right? Not some estimated number, but I think in a week should be able to get a quote in a week and a half of what that
and so like the liability pieces, right? I didn't go to law school. I just watch a lot of Law and Order. But what I've heard is these pieces have not been tested in the courts yet. And so to send me out or send staff out to try to figure out what some of these pieces are. I mean, if they haven't been tested and that, precedent thing hasn't been created? See, I listen. If those things haven't been developed, it's going to be hard to bring back information. Liability, I don't want to speak for another agency. Liability translates into cost. And all of our agencies, school board, sheriff's office, municipalities, none of us have pots that overflow. And so the direct question to the county, to the sheriff will be, will you assume the cost of additional liability for accidental behavior of these employees? I don't know if that's I don't know if that's a reasonable request. Additional insurance, there's been an estimate. We can try to find a more concrete estimate. But I'm hearing additional timelines here. I'm not only hearing May 8th, but I'm hearing in advance, week and a half of May 8th to get that done and to proceed along these other uphill battles of mental health, SROs, and school hardenings.
Okay. So I think I have, I'm sorry, Matt, go ahead.
The key indicator is when, during that process, does the sheriff take over? Does he take over when there's an active shooter on campus and all those other pieces so that we can then get so that piece has to be first, the identification of the takeover of when the insurance occurs, and then we can figure out our insurance up to that point, and he can figure out from his point what that's going to be. There's also research that shows that, and this came from our own risk liability, that we have to purchase a police liability piece of insurance and a couple other factors to it. But the bottom line is that you can get a ballpark as to what it is. We can't go into case law. We can't go into what it is that the claims bills are going to be if somebody gets shot, because you're right, we don't have any precedent for that. But we can get a cost and a directive of to when and where the difference is taken over. And I already asked Mark Langdorf last Friday to start that process, and I reiterated in an email today to have them communicate with the sheriff's office immediately over how that would work. So I think that it's possible in the time frame that we have, and we can identify that piece. The other piece that I think that I had mentioned before is to find out what the MOU of the individual is. Are they supposed to respond and leave the kids in the classroom if they are armed in case of a response? Are they supposed to, what are they liable for that? That's the piece. That's the other part of the MOU that we have to talk about. That's it.
And I have not gotten an answer to the question, are there any policies that need to be modified or created around that? Or that's an integral part of that? And we've been asking that question for over a month and there's still no answer. So we can't go ahead and say, okay, let's do that, and then we'll figure out what the policies are. That's all an integral part. And maybe the reason we don't have an answer, there is no modifications. I don't know. But that's got to be definitive.
Amy, didn't you answer that and say there were no policies at one point in a discussion?
Our current policy allows, are you talking like bringing weapons on campus? Our current policy allows it if they're law enforcement, and under the STOMP program, those guardians would be sworn in as law enforcement, so they would be covered under that. As for other policies and like involving insurance and stuff, we'd have to look to see what those, if those are specific to the district's requirement to have insurance for employees / guardians if they're not under whose authority they're acting.